This is the story of Edwina Martin Brown, a woman who married the man who tried to kill her, only to die by his hands 11 years later. This story unfolded in Little Rock, Arkansas, where a quiet neighborhood would witness two attempts on one woman's life, the first through hired killers, and the last by the hand of the man who shared her bed. We all desire love. We write songs about it, make movies celebrating it, and spend our lives hoping to find that one person who makes our world complete. But what happens when love becomes a weapon? When the person who promised to cherish you becomes the architect of your destruction? On March 27, 2023, at 4 p.m., gunshots shattered the peace of Fairley Drive. Inside number 4704, a 36-year-old woman lay dying, her fingers still wrapped around her phone, a half-dialed 911 call that would never be completed. But to understand why Edwina Martin Brown died that day, we need to go back. Back to another winter evening, another attempt on her life, and a choice that would haunt her until her final breath. January 2012. The air was crisp in Little Rock as 25-year-old Edwina Martin and her boyfriend, Daniel Hill, drove through the city. She was building a new life, a successful clothing boutique owner, a loving mother, and finally free from a controlling relationship with Danny Brown, the father of her children. At 22, Daniel Hill represented everything her past relationship wasn't. He encouraged her dreams, supported her independence, and showed her what genuine love felt like. That evening, as they pulled into the parking lot of Valley Crossing Apartments, Hill turned to Edwina and asked a simple question. "Do you love me?" She smiled, remembering later for the police. "I was like, yeah, baby, I love you." Neither knew these would be their last words of affection. They were visiting Edwina's mother's apartment, a routine trip that should have been nothing more than a family evening. Danny Brown was supposed to drop off their daughter for hair braiding. He had insisted on this location this time, making multiple calls to confirm Edwina would be there. Later, investigators would understand why. As Edwina and Hill climbed the stairs to apartment 1502 on Green Mountain Drive, two shadows waited in the darkness. Ivor Slick Gordon and Quentin Boo Jones had been paid to be there. Their mission, in the words Gordon would later repeat to police, blow her head off. Betty Martin, Edwina's mother, sat in her living room when the door opened. She saw her daughter enter, then Hill, and then two men so close behind them that she assumed they were all together. In the split second it took her to realize something was wrong, the first shot rang out. The bullet hit Edwina in the chest. As she fell, Daniel Hill did what heroes do. He fought. Without hesitation, he launched himself at the armed men, managing to wrestle one of their guns away. But in that moment of bravery, the second shooter raised his weapon. The gunshot that killed Daniel Hill echoed through the apartment complex. In that moment, it felt like the end. But it wasn't over. Edwina, already wounded, crawled to her mother as the second gunman pursued her. Betty Martin stood between her daughter and the killer, pleading, "Please don't shoot her, don't do this." But the gunman was determined. He fired again, the bullet finding Edwina's hip as she huddled behind her mother's legs. In a back bedroom, an 11-year-old boy, Edwina's nephew, hid under a bed, listening to the violence that would haunt his dreams for years to come. He would later tell police how Hill had tried to protect them all, how his last act on earth was an attempt to save the woman he loved. As sirens wailed in the distance, two killers fled into the night, leaving behind a scene of heartbreak and horror. Daniel Hill lay dead, Edwina fought for her life, and somewhere across town, Danny Brown sat eating pizza with his kids, the alibi he would later give to police. Dear viewers and subscribers, welcome to another episode of True Crime Stories 24/7. If this is your first time tuning in, it's great to have you here. If you appreciate stories like this, please do well to subscribe and leave a like to see more videos from us. The story you are about to hear is not just another crime of passion or a random act of violence. This was a calculated hit, ordered by a man who couldn't accept that the woman he considered his property had dared to find happiness with someone else. The price for Edwina's freedom? $500 and a used Chevrolet SUV, the going rate for human life in Little Rock that winter. This incident, in the end, shocked investigators and devastated families, and raised questions about the complex psychology of domestic violence. 2 weeks after surviving an attempt on her life, after watching her boyfriend die protecting her, Edwina Martin makes a funny decision that defies all logic and understanding. She would marry the man who tried to kill her. Yes, you heard that right. 2 weeks after surviving a deadly ambush orchestrated by Danny, Edwina said, "I do." How could someone marry the person who allegedly tried to end their life? This question alone is enough to make us pause and reflect. It challenges our understanding of human behavior, love, and survival. But Edwina's story is not as simple as a bad decision or blind forgiveness. It's a story of control, trauma, and manipulation, a story that reveals the darker complexities of abusive relationships. The investigation into Daniel Hill's murder and the attempt on Edwina's life moved swiftly. Little Rock detectives had seen their share of violence, but this case was different. It wasn't just the brutality of the attack. It was the calculated nature, the cold precision of a man who would rather see the mother of his children dead than with someone else. At first, Danny Brown played his part perfectly. When police called to inform him that Edwina had been shot, his response was rehearsed innocence. "I was eating pizza with my kids," he claimed, his voice steady as he described his evening. He even explained why he'd insisted on meeting at Betty Martin's apartment. He didn't want Edwina to know he was at another woman's house when they were arranging the drop-off of their daughter. But in Little Rock's criminal underworld, secrets have a way of surfacing. An anonymous tip led investigators to Quentin Boo Jones and Ivor Slick Gordon. These weren't random street thugs. They were hired killers with a direct connection to Danny Brown. And one of them was ready to talk. Gordon, faced with the weight of evidence against him, broke first. In a recorded confession that would shock even veteran detectives, he detailed how Brown had orchestrated the hit. "He told me to blow her head off," Gordon recalled, describing a meeting a month before the attack. "He didn't care how it was done. Brown's only concern? Make sure the children aren't hurt." The price for murder came cheap in Little Rock. Brown had promised Gordon $500 and a car, a 2002 Chevrolet SUV. But like most discount killers, Gordon and Jones proved inefficient. Their first attempt on Edwina's life a week earlier had failed. Brown, growing impatient, sweetened the deal with an extra $220 and the SUV for a second try. The evidence mounted. Phone records placed Brown in constant contact with the killers. Surveillance footage from a Walmart parking lot captured the handoff of the SUV. Inside that very vehicle, detectives found Brown's pay stubs, a careless mistake that would help tie everything together. Both Edwina and her young nephew identified Gordon in a photo lineup. At this point, the case seemed airtight, but no one was prepared for what happened next. 2 weeks after bullets tore through her chest and hip, while still recovering from wounds that nearly claimed her life, Edwina Martin walked into a Little Rock courthouse. The bruises were still visible, her bandages hidden beneath a simple dress. And there, in a ceremony witnessed by only a handful of people, she married Danny Brown, the very man police were building a murder case against. The courthouse clerk who processed their marriage license would later remember the strange atmosphere that day. There was a bride, still healing from near-fatal gunshot wounds, marrying a man who police suspected had orchestrated her attempted murder. Yet both signed their names with steady hands as if this were any other wedding day. 4 days later, police cruisers surrounded Brown's residence. The evidence was too substantial to ignore, despite the sudden marriage. Detectives arrested him, charging him with capital murder for Daniel Hill's death and attempted murder for the attack on Edwina. But Brown had played his cards masterfully. Under Arkansas law, spouses cannot be compelled to testify against each other. The hasty wedding wasn't just a shock, it was a legal strategy. And it worked. By August 2012, the prosecution's case began to crumble. Their key witness, now Mrs. Danny Brown, transformed from a cooperative victim into their biggest obstacle. In meetings with the district attorney's office, Edwina changed her story repeatedly. Details she had once provided with crystal clarity became fuzzy, timelines shifted, and certainties dissolved into maybes. Prosecutors obtained recordings of jail phone calls between Edwina and Brown that proved she had no intention of cooperating. The woman who had once helped build the case against her would-be killer now worked tirelessly to set him free. While Gordon received a life sentence and Jones accepted a 55-year plea deal, the alleged mastermind, walked free. In August 2012, prosecutors were forced to drop all charges against Brown, citing Edwina's transformation from star witness to increasingly antagonistic obstacle. But the question that haunted investigators, that would haunt Little Rock for the next 11 years, remained. Why? Why would a woman marry the man who tried to kill her? Why protect someone who had orchestrated not just her attempted murder, but the death of an innocent man who had only tried to love her? The answers lay in the complex psychology of domestic violence, in the years of control and manipulation that had preceded that January night, and in the fear that would ultimately prove prophetic. 11 years after choosing to marry her would-be killer, Edwina Martin Brown would face him again. Only this time, there would be no escape. For 11 years, Danny and Edwina Brown presented a carefully curated image to the world. Their social media accounts painted pictures of the perfect family: shopping trips, dance recitals, church gatherings, and business celebrations. To outsiders, they had overcome their troubled past. To those who knew the truth, they were watching a slow-motion tragedy unfold. Edwina threw herself into building her legacy. Her clothing boutique, Basha's Beauty, became a Little Rock success story. She expanded her business acumen, eventually securing a position at Blue Cross Blue Shield in 2020. But with each success came a price. Danny Brown's presence grew more pronounced, his control more absolute. The dance studio became her sanctuary. As coach of the Buell dance team, she transformed young dancers into confident performers. Her daughter Danielle served as team captain for 4 years, and in those moments of choreography and music, Edwina found fragments of freedom. Yet even there, Brown's shadow loomed. He attended every practice and every competition, his watchful eyes never far from his wife. At Williams Temple, Church of God in Christ, Edwina shared daily devotionals online, speaking of faith, forgiveness, and perseverance. Her posts became a window into her soul-coded messages of struggle wrapped in Scripture. "Sometimes God asks us to endure what we cannot understand," she wrote once. "Our trials become our testimony." But behind closed doors, at their home on Fairley Drive, a different reality played out. Neighbors reported frequent arguments, their voices carrying across manicured lawns. Friends noticed how Edwina's once frequent gatherings became rare, her phone calls shorter, always ending abruptly if Brown entered the room. Her vibrant personality, the spark that had once lit up rooms, dimmed in his presence. Every word seemed calculated, every movement measured. The woman who had built a successful business now needed his approval for the smallest decisions. Even her social media posts required his review, a fact revealed by her sister during later investigations. The control extended to every aspect of their lives. When Edwina's business flourished, Brown inserted himself into operations. Customer receipts had to be shown daily. Inventory couldn't be ordered without his approval. The independence she had built became another chain in his arsenal of control. There were brief rebellions, moments when Edwina tried to reclaim pieces of herself. She would disappear from social media for days or weeks, only to return with posts about working through challenges and staying strong in faith. Each absence, investigators would later learn, coincided with escalating tensions at home. The children, Danny III and Danielle, grew up watching this complex dance between their parents. They learned to read the silence, to interpret the subtle shifts in atmosphere that signaled brewing storms. Their mother's smile, genuine when dancing or working with her students, took on a brittle quality at home. But in early March 2023, something changed. Those closest to Edwina noticed subtle shifts in her behavior. During her lunch breaks at Blue Cross Blue Shield, she began making careful phone calls to domestic violence resources. Her sister discovered clothes missing from her closet, not enough to raise an alarm but sufficient for an emergency escape. At dance practice, she confided in another coach about feeling unsafe at home. "If anything happens to me," she said, "you know who did it." The words, casual in delivery but heavy with meaning, would later haunt those who heard them. The week before March 27th, Edwina took steps toward independence that would prove fatal. She opened a separate bank account, a fact Brown discovered through their shared phone plan notifications. She spoke with her children about staying temporarily with their aunt. On social media, she began removing Brown from photos and stopped sharing their location. The final red flag came when she called her mother, asking to store important documents at her house. Just in case, she said, her voice carrying a weight Betty Martin would only later understand. Among those papers were life insurance policies, birth certificates, and handwritten notes documenting years of abuse. Brown noticed these changes. Neighbors reported his car circling the block at odd hours. Security cameras captured him following Edwina to work, watching from parking lots as she went about her day. The control that had kept her captive for 11 years was slipping, and Danny Brown was not a man who accepted the loss. March 27, 2023, began like any other Monday. Edwina went to work at Blue Cross Blue Shield, handled customer calls, and shared lunch with colleagues. Security cameras caught her final exit from the building at 3:30 p.m. She texted her daughter about dinner plans. "Thinking about making your favorite pasta tonight. Love you, baby." She never got the chance to make that dinner. As she pulled into her driveway on Fairley Drive, Danny Brown was waiting. This time, there would be no hired killers, no elaborate plots. After 11 years of maintaining the perfect facade, of playing the reformed husband who had overcome his past, Brown would show his true face one final time. The neighbors who heard the gunshots at 4 p.m. couldn't have known they were witnessing the end of an 11-year countdown, a timer that had started the day Edwina chose to marry her would-be killer rather than testify against him. They couldn't have known that the silence that followed was the sound of a woman's bid for freedom being answered with bullets. What exactly transpired in those final moments may never be fully known, but the evidence tells a chilling story. Multiple gunshots rang out, shattering the quiet afternoon. A neighbor's security camera captured Danny's car speeding away just minutes later. When police arrived, they found Edwina critically wounded in the living room. Her phone lay inches from her hand, its screen displaying an unfinished 911 call. It was a desperate act of survival, one that tragically came too late. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but the injuries were too severe. By 5:17 p.m., Edwina was gone. In the hours that followed, investigators began piecing together the evidence. They found signs of a violent struggle: overturned furniture, scattered shell casings, and Edwina's broken phone. A notepad in the home revealed a list of domestic violence hotlines and shelter addresses, a heartbreaking reminder of the steps she had been taking to escape. The tragedy of Edwina Martin's death wasn't just in the loss of her life. It was in the years of control, manipulation, and fear that had led to that final, fatal moment. And as the search for Danny Brown Jr. began, one thing became painfully clear. This was a story that had been building for over a decade, and it was far from over. The manhunt for Danny Maurice Brown Jr. began almost immediately after Edwina's death. Law enforcement officers, familiar with his history and patterns, acted swiftly, putting out bulletins and launching a multi-state search. Brown had vanished from the scene, leaving behind a trail of evidence that pointed to his guilt. Surveillance footage of his car speeding away, forensic evidence inside the home, and even the murder weapon later found in a vehicle he abandoned. For 21 days, Danny Brown evaded capture. During this time, Little Rock was gripped by a mix of fear and anticipation. Brown's ability to disappear so quickly and thoroughly only added to the tension, as community members feared what he might do next. The streets of Little Rock, once alive with the ordinary bustle of life, now seemed heavy with unease, the echoes of Edwina's tragedy still fresh. On April 17, 2023, the U.S. Marshals found Brown hiding in a motel just outside Memphis, Tennessee. He was alone, with a packed bag, a fake ID, and over $3,000 in cash, clear signs that he was planning to flee even further. The arrest was swift and without incident, bringing a sense of relief to those who had been waiting for justice. But for Edwina's family and friends, it was bittersweet. The capture of her killer couldn't bring her back. The evidence against Brown was overwhelming. Security footage, phone records, witness statements, and forensic evidence painted a shocking picture of premeditated murder. The prosecution sought the harshest penalty possible, citing his long history of violence and the years of manipulation and control he had exerted over Edwina. Unlike the 2012 case, This time, there was no escape for Danny Brown. As the legal proceedings began, Edwina's story resonated far beyond the courtroom. Her life, her struggles, and her tragic end became a rallying cry for awareness around domestic violence. Her friends, family, and even strangers came together to honor her memory, ensuring that her voice would not be silenced by her death. The Bodacious Beauty Boutique, the business she built with her own hands, became a memorial of sorts. Her final collection was sold with all proceeds going to support local women's shelters. Her dance team performed a moving tribute at their next competition, wearing purple ribbons, the color of domestic violence awareness. In her name, a scholarship fund was established to help children affected by domestic violence, ensuring that her legacy would continue to uplift and inspire. As we close this story, let me leave you with this. Edwina Martin was more than a victim. She was a mother, a mentor, a businesswoman, and a fighter. Her life, though cut short, has the power to spark change. And while we mourn her loss, we must also honor her memory by ensuring that no one else suffers in silence as she did. And to ensure that, the only thing you can do to help is to share this story. Talk about it with your friends and family. Be a safe space for someone who might need it. And if you're watching this and find yourself in a situation that feels all too familiar, know that there is help out there and you are not alone. Reach out for help as fast as possible. If you desire to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Together, we can keep these stories alive, raise awareness, and maybe even save a life. Before I draw the curtain, perhaps you have anything in mind to say in regards to this case or something related. Kindly share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation that might help someone else find their way out of the darkness. This has been True Crime Stories 24/7. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video.